Well folks, it's time for another repair and startup video. Been a few months now. It's been a pretty darn busy year so far, so with work and all that. So I've been on the road quite a bit and working here in the shop and haven't exactly had much time to do any video work. But I'd picked up a project. I had bought this tractor yesterday and I figured it's well worth doing a revamp video on given that its current condition. And I got this from a customer of mine. It's a 1951 Ford 8N, and his mother had bought it brand new in 51, of course, and they ran it for quite a bit, and obviously it's been sitting for quite a bit as well, as you guys can see. It's in pretty tough shape, but it's not something that I won't be able to bring back. It'd be kind of a downright shame to part the thing out, even though I know they made about 500,000 of these things, I think was the number on them. They was well over 500,000, so there's plenty of them out there, but I know this one's going to be salvageable, and it would be kind of neat to have a running and driving tractor that looks like this. So last night I did a little bit of investigating on the engine just to make sure that I could get it running and everything would check out and it'd be video worthy rather than making a video on it and having the thing be junk inside. So on the number 4 cylinder back here, I do have compression. 3, 2, and 1 do not have any compression, and they all have stuck valves. So what I did, which was kind of a dumb idea, but I figured, hey, you really can't lose given the condition. So I put a small pry bar on the valve stem here for the number 1 cylinder, tapped on it to try to pull it down. Didn't know how stuck it was, and I snapped the stem off of it. Not a big deal, I can always get another valve for it. So what I'm going to end up doing today is we're going to pull this head off of here and get all the valves freed up, probably pull the full valve train out of it, clean up the valves, and then I will get a head gasket on order, and then if I break any other valves on the way, I can order those as well. So we're going to get that done. Carburetor's obviously going to be gone through. This does have a side mount distributor on it, which I really like. I've never been a fan of the 8N tractors, but I do like the later ones with the side mount distributor and the tachometer on the dash. I think the tach kind of dresses it off nice. And of course, many of you know who work on tractors, the front mount distributor is a real pain to work on, but side mount is definitely a lot easier. So we're going to get that squared away. The exhaust on the thing is, if this thing will focus under here, it's completely rotted out. There's really not much left to it, but we're going to leave it on there anyways. And you can also see that it has the brackets for a Dearborn mid-mount sickle bar on it still, which I'll be leaving on there as well. So the rear tires were replaced at some point. Those are in pretty fair shape and they are holding air. The front right tire holds air, and the front left is definitely going to need a rim because it's a little bit rotted out on the side, but I can source one of those and get that replaced. The tire I think is still salvageable. So we got a pretty fair amount of work ahead of us, folks, to get this thing up and running again, but I believe it can be done. So first things first, I'm going to start with getting this hood and the gas tank pulled off of here, and then we can start by draining down the radiator and getting all the cooling system stuff off of the front of the engine. Alright, so that makes everything a little bit easier to access. So I think what I'm going to end up doing with this is I'm going to leave the radiator on it for now. I do have to test that though because it is dry. Granted, it's been sitting for a while, but I'm sure it's been fixed over the years and who knows if it's any good still. So I do have to check on that. But what I'm going to end up doing is just pulling this top tube off of here. That way I can get the head off of it. I do have to crack open the drain caulk on the side over here, whether that's going to move or not, and see if I can drain any water out of it if there's anything left, along with the one in the side of the block here. And I'm sure you guys might have seen this oil pan underneath. Just as a side note, this is what I got out of the transmission for water the other night, which really wasn't as much as I was figuring on, given how long this thing was sitting outside. But we can address that as time goes, once I know that this engine is going to be okay. So first things first, let's get this hose pulled off of here, and then we can see about draining out what's left in the radiator. So there seems to be hardly anything left in the radiator when I opened up the drain cock. So I'm assuming that it either all leaked out or something. I mean, that's all I can really figure. I don't think it's in the engine. Kind of doubt it, but I am going to pull this hose off just to see if anything else comes out, because that drain cock might be plugged. And it looks like there's some more in here. Hopefully this doesn't make too much of a mess. Water jacket looks a little bit rough. There's a lot of crusty stuff like so down inside of there. So we're probably going to have to flush that head out once we get it. And we may or may not flush the block as well, depending on how much stuff is in there. So now that we have our radiator drained down and the hose is off of here, all I have to do is finish removing a couple of the things from the head before I start to unbolt it. One of which is going to be the oil filter canister on the side and the ignition stuff over here, the coil and the bracket that holds all of the spark plug wires. So one thing I was planning on doing was pulling off the intake manifold, and I think right now I'm going to end up leaving that on. And as you can see, hopefully with any luck, the gaskets, I don't know if it's going to focus, but they're a little bit blistered there on the back where the manifold mates up to the block. So I don't know how well the manifold is going to mate flush when it goes back on with new gaskets. And I really don't want to have to buy a new manifold for this thing if it does not mate flush and it has to be machined or just a new manifold put on there. So if I do have to pull the valve train out of this, which I would like to do just to clean up all the stems, but worst case, I do have a pretty sizable valve spring compressor that should be able to fit in here if I take the carburetor off and still grab all the valves to compress them with the manifold on here. I believe I can do it. So I'm going to try to attempt that first. Worst case, I'll pull the manifold off, and obviously folks, if this was a customer's tractor, the manifold would definitely be coming off of here to do this thing right the first way. But given the nature of the tractor and it's my own rig, this is how we're going to go about it for now. So we're going to get the rest of this stuff pulled off of here, and then we can start loosening up some head bolts. Everything's been unbolted from the head, so now we can see whether these head bolts will break free. Yeah, you can't beat that, folks. Everything came loose. Head bolts are all out and loose, so now we should be able to pop this head off of here without too much trouble, it looks like. Well, not too bad, folks. Cylinder walls all look fairly nice. No rust or anything like that. Doesn't seem to be any scoring. I guarantee that the engine's very worn out from the looks of it. It's been very well used over the years. There is some carbon that's built up, kind of like a shelf over the edge of the pistons, but that's not too big of a deal. We'll get all that cleaned out of there. And there's a little bit of moisture rust you can see built up around the exhaust valves. Once again, not too big of a deal. All the exhaust valves are stuck up on this with the exception of this cylinder right here. And this intake valve is up, but that one's loose because it's just got the lifter on it. So that's all good. And the head itself looks like it's pretty good shape. I don't know whether it's warped or anything, nor am I going to really worry about it. There's just a little bit of rust on the number 3 cylinder, but that was about it. Just a lot of heavy oily carbon buildup. And that's about all. So we're going to start with getting this head gasket off of here and get the top of this engine all scraped off, get the pistons cleaned up, and then see what we can find for the valve seats, or see what the valve seats look like rather. And if they look like they're a little bit tough, I'll make an attempt to pull all the valves out of this, and we can do a quick lap on it while we have it apart this far and get all those squared away for when it goes back together. So I just did a quick residual cleaning of the head here. There's still a lot more of it that has to get scraped down and wiped off and all that, but all the heavy carbon and everything is gone. So what I did do is tap the exhaust valves that are stuck up with my hammer, and I did get them to move. It actually didn't take too much to get them to move a little bit. So those will free up okay. And what I did do is I took my valve spring compressor and I tried that on the other side, and I can get in here without taking the exhaust manifold off in order to get these valves out. I went ahead and pulled off the carburetor along with my other valve cover on the other side here, and I could slip in there without an issue with this compressor right here, because I have one of these styles and there's plenty of room to get through everything. So what we're going to do is we're going to end up pulling just all the valves out of here. That way I can get them cleaned up on the wire wheel, and like I said, while it's this far apart, I might as well lap everything in. I don't know how well you guys will be able to see it, but as you can see, the seat for this exhaust valve is all rust, and there's no sense in putting the thing back together with a rusty seat like that and just doing the redneck valve job like you guys have seen me do before, since it's this far apart. So we'll get the valve spring compressor in here and we'll start pulling these valves out. Alright, so I forgot to hit the record button when I took the intake valve out here on the #1 cylinder. So I guess you guys get to watch me unstick the exhaust valve in order to get this one out instead. Obviously, if you're doing this with the valve you're going to reuse, be very careful when you hit the head of it. Make sure you hit it as square as you can, that way you don't warp the head either way. But being that I'm going to be replacing this valve anyways, and it's already got a broken stem on it, I'm not all that worried about warping the head. I just have to get it to move well enough so that way when I take the keepers and the spring and everything off of it, I can get it out of the head without having to pry on it too much. And of course, you guys have seen me do this in other videos. If it gets to a certain point, you can usually grab them with channel locks, twist the head around some. That way it helps get the oil down past the stem. And being that this has a broken stem, we can actually just do this with it, providing it'll do what I want it to do here. We can pull it right out so you can see where it snapped right at the base there. Not the brightest idea I've ever had to try to free up a stuck valve, but like I said, I didn't have much to lose with this thing, so I gave it a shot. Alright folks, so due to the nature of these exhaust valves, I have to pull the intake and the exhaust manifold off in order to get these out of the block. They made them in such a way where you have to push down on the guide itself, take a clip out inside of here, and then you pull the guide up, take the cap off at the bottom of the stem, and you could take the entire assembly out, and then the valve spring off of the valve and so on. It's kind of a hokey design, but that's how Ford made them. Nowadays you can either get that style as a replacement, or you can get just a regular keeper with the clips. And since I'm not doing a valve train, this style is going to be going back into here. But as I said, I want to get the valves out of here so I can lap in the seats, and the only way to do that, unfortunately in this case, is pull off the manifold. So the gaskets are blistered like I said, but they're not as bad as I was figuring on, so I think this will sit on here just flush without an issue when everything goes back together. So what we're going to do is see if we can get these guides to move, which given the nature of this engine I really hope that they do, and see if we can get the clip out, and then of course the exhaust valve out of the engine. I was able to get the front valve in this, well, the front valve is out as you saw, and I was able to get the spring out as well. And I also got the number 3 cylinder exhaust valve out. Luckily enough, this guy did move in the block. And this is what the, if I can get you guys over here in the shade, this is what the assembly looks like. So you have the guide up here, the spring, and in the bottom you have the little retainer, and then that is what they call the, it's supposed to be a rotating exhaust valve. So that's the cap that goes on the end of it, and there are 2 retainers inside there, if you can see them, just like so, and they go all the way up inside that cap. So you can't pull these apart like you would, like I have set up here with a conventional valve compressor. So the way they have you do these is there's a clip on the inside. So there's a clip on the inside, if you can see them, those tangs sticking out where they push up into the block, and that would be this little piece here, which this one's actually, the ears are broken off of this one, and that slides in like so, and then the valve spring and everything pushes it up into the block. But what you have to do is you have to go in through the exhaust port or the intake port, and you push down on this guide, which brings the guide down, which, now that I dropped my retainer, it makes the retainer come down out of that little recessed area, as you can see, and then you can pull that out and take the guide out right through the top. Well, the issue that I'm having is this front one here is pretty well stuck, although I got it to move. The second one here on the second cylinder is really stuck and it will not move, and you can't, unfortunately, take the valve out to drive down into it with anything. And then of course the one on the 4th cylinder I haven't tried yet. So worst case, what I'm going to do, once again, if this was a customer's tractor, I would not be doing this, but I'll end up just snapping the end of the valve stem off, like what happened with the first one by accident, because then I can pull the valve out, and then I can get a punch down in there and some oil, I can drive the guide loose, and then I can do like I did here with putting a nut on the lifter and push the guide out, which is the route that I might have to take. And then I'll just have to buy 3 exhaust valves instead of 1, which isn't too big of a deal because they are in stock. So I'm going to take a crack at these other 2 and see if I can get them out. Well, a little bit of patience and persistence, folks. Everything came out like it should. I even got the number 1 exhaust valve guide out, was able to press that out as well with the lifter, and now all I have to order is 1 exhaust valve aside from all the gaskets and everything. So pretty darn happy about that. Last thing I'm going to have to do is clean up the head here and get everything lapped in. So I'm going to give this a really good scraping and clean down inside where the guides go, down inside the manifold ports and everything, scrape the head, shine up the head, and then take care of these valve seats. As you can see, they're pretty rough looking. As long as they don't have to get recut, everything should lap in just fine. And then of course when I get the new valve for the number 1 cylinder, I'll be able to lap in that front hole right there. So aside from that, I'll check in with you guys once I get all this cleaned up, and you can see how it turned out. Alright folks, so after about 4 or 5 hours of cleaning this afternoon, I got everything cleaned up for the top end of the engine. All the valves have been cleaned up and wire wheeled with the exception of the one broken one. And the faces on them are pretty decent. They'll lap in just fine, along with the seats in the engine as well. So the only thing I have to get is a valve, and then one of these forks here, where the ends of them were just a little bit nipped off from something. And that's about it. All the guides came out. I finished taking out the intake valve guides, just so I can get those cleaned up. I also got the intake manifold and exhaust manifold cleaned up, and that sits on the block fairly flush. There's a little bit of a gap on either end, but I think that'll be just fine when the gasket goes on there. And the head itself cleaned up very nicely too. And I laid that on top of the engine, and there's no, doesn't seem like there's any warp. It's not walking around or anything like that, nor do I see any cracks in it. So luckily enough, the head seems to be in good shape, and the engine cleaned up fairly nicely as well. Everything's all decarboned as it should be. As you can see, the valve seat faces. Some of the exhaust ones are a little bit rough, as you can see, but I think those will lap in. Like I said, I think they'll be just fine. I don't have a valve seat cutter yet, because I just haven't had enough work to justify buying one, because they are fairly expensive. So lapping compound will take care of that. I also have the manifold face all cleaned up. A little bit pitted, but it cleaned up fairly nice. And I just have to finish up where the valve covers go on the side, along with degreasing and cleaning up the inside here, because a lot of the crap from up top ended up falling down into the chamber here. But I'm not going to do that yet because this is going to be sitting here for a few days, and I don't want to degrease everything because I'm sure it's going to get some moisture rust on there just from kicking around for the week. I do have to order some parts this weekend, so that way they'll be in time for next week, and then we can get these valves lapped in, get the engine back together, and keep plugging away on this thing. Aside from the upper radiator hose and the tachometer cable, I got everything in for the Ford, as you can see. I did order an extra head gasket just in case, and I do have the gasket set here along with plug wires, plugs. I didn't know which lower radiator hose I was going to need, so I got both of those. And I also got a new tachometer and voltage regulator if I need it. This tachometer on the thing, you really can't read the face of it anymore, but it does have the hours on it. And I figured if I can get that one to work, I'll leave that one in there. And worst case, I can change it out and put the new tachometer in there as well. The valves are also all cleaned up, and those are in bags. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to get the valve train all cleaned up. I'm going to get it lapped in and put together because we're already 20 minutes into this video, and folks, we still got a long ways to go on this tractor. So I'm going to get that taken care of. I'll give you a couple of snippets that you can see along the way, and then we're going to move on from that because we got a lot of fuel system work to do along with the rest of the tractor itself. So anyways, folks, let's get to it. Engine is all back together. So the last thing that I have to do to this before I can do a test fire to make sure everything checks out is I have to rebuild the carburetor on it and make sure the ignition system is all squared away. And here's our carburetor. It's just a Marvel Schebler, nothing special, cast iron body. It almost looks like it was rebuilt before this tractor went out of commission, judging by the somewhat decent looking gray paint on the back side of it and that little gasket sticking out of the main jet there. So with any luck, this won't be too bad inside. I think the gas was shut off on this tractor, so hopefully nothing stayed in the carburetor and it'll be an easy clean. Worst case though, we degrease it and we can run it through the glass speed blaster and it'll be all squared away. So let's get this thing opened up and take a look inside. So here's the inside of the carburetor. Everything's all been pulled apart. Main jets are out of it, and the small jets are all came out, luckily enough. So it was definitely rebuilt not long before they stopped using the tractor. There's just very light rust on the inside, nothing major. So I'm going to run it through the glass bead cabinet and just give it a light blast on the inside of it. And all the other components, the main jet needle, and even the main jet were in good shape too. Because usually this piece right here is all shellacked up, or it's got dry white powdery gas on it, and it all has to get cleaned out. But I'm very happy with the condition of what this thing looks like on the inside. So I'll get this run through the glass bead cabinet, and then we can start reassembling with new gaskets. Everything's all cleaned up and ready to go. The inside of the body cleaned out very nicely on the glass bead blaster. As you can see, we're right back down to the original casting there, and all the rust has all been cleaned off of it. Usually when I do these carburetors, I'll blast the outside so it looks just like the inside. Paint, rust, everything comes off of it, and then I'll clear coat them 3 times before they go back to the customer or back on the tractor. So it's pretty much like a new carburetor. But because I want to preserve the character of the tractor, being all rusty and all that, I just left the outside as it is. But all the ports and orifices and everything inside of the carburetor is clean, and that's of course my main concern. So everything else, the needles, the jets, those have all been cleaned up. I ran a tip cleaner through everything and steel wooled what I could, so that's all ready to go back together, along with having a brand new body gasket and flange gasket as well. So I'll get this back together, and then we'll be ready to go back onto the manifold. Well folks, I ended up making some progress on the Ford this week. I got the carburetor mounted back up. I also went through the distributor, cleaned up the points plate, and the mechanical advance weights, because those were stuck. And I got all that cleaned up, so we have a nice white hot spark out of it, and I was able to get this thing to light off and run. And let me tell you folks, it does run really nice. It was pretty quiet at first. It turns out that the exhaust was plugged up with mouse nests and whatnot, and once I got that cleaned out, it sounds like, well, just like an 8-end should, folks. So it's a very nice running engine. I'm actually pretty surprised given the condition of it. So that valve job definitely helped out. So. Nice and quiet. Yeah, it does. I don't think the generator is real happy, but great spoiler. Pressure. Sounds great. Yeah. That exhaust is plugged.
Oh, is it?
There's nothing coming out of it. That's why it sounds so quiet.
I think there's a rat.
Seems like it. So what we're going to be doing today though is getting this thing buttoned up, hopefully most of the way, because I have a Ford 801 that has to come in the end of this week for a complete revamp and going through 801 Workmaster, and this thing has to be out of here to make room for that. So I ended up picking up a new radiator for it. I pressure tested this one this week and it is leaking, unfortunately. I was hoping I was going to be able to use it, but right down here on the corner, I peeled back some of the fins, but it's leaking between this lower tank and this side piece here. There's some rot and it's just pushing water up like this when I pressure tested it. So what I ended up doing is I bought a new radiator for it. It's not a restoration quality one, it's the cheapest one that you can get for the 8 ends, and that'll do just fine for what this tractor is going to be used for. So this morning the goal is to get that radiator changed out, get the rest of the cooling system all hooked up, and the front end of this tractor back together, fuel tank, hood, and all that good stuff. So anyways folks, let's get to it. So just a heads up to any of you folks that might have to put a new radiator in your N series Ford. When I bought this one, because it's not the restoration quality radiator and it's just a plain Jane aftermarket, in the description it said you have to cut the original fan shroud to get it to fit this radiator, unless you buy the new fan shroud, of course. So luckily enough, as of right now, it doesn't have to be cut. The most I had to do was just bend up this corner over here where the overflow pipe comes down, but everything else lines up just fine, whether you can see the screw holes or not. They're all lining up okay. Because it was mentioned that you have to cut the bottom of it, which I would assume would be down here just to get it to slip in or mate up with the radiator, but everything mates up just fine with this original shroud. So just a side note for any of you guys that have to put a new radiator in your Ford, you can use the original fan shroud without having to cut it. So this lower radiator hose down here is just a regular right angle hose that I had bought for it, and hopefully you guys can see this, is when it makes this curve right here, it wants to hit this fan belt. And this fitting here, actually, if I didn't have this little bit of a curve where it was sticking out, it would come straight into the fan belt, and I kind of have it jammed in such a way where it'll curve around it. So what I ended up doing is I bought both of these lower radiator hoses that could go on this tractor because I wasn't sure which one was going to work. This one, as you can see, has that curve in it, and I know that the 100 series uses these to get around the power steering belt for the power steering pump and all that. So this one should clear the belt for the generator here, so that way we can still hook up. Yep, we can still hook up to the radiator. So as you can see, we get plenty of room around the belt, so nothing's going to hit it. Granted, the hose is just a little bit smaller of a diameter, but it's not going to make a lick of difference with how much this water pump really moves in here. So we get some clamps on that, and then our radiator will be all hooked up. Cooling system's all squared away, so now it's time to mount the hood back up. So I ended up pulling the gas tank out of this about a week or so ago and getting everything drained down. I had some really bad gas left in it, and then I had flushed it out with some paint thinner. It got most of the crust out of the inside of it, so there's really not much left in it. and it's going to be getting a new bowl filter anyway, so that should catch whatever residual is left in there. So the tank, it's pretty well rusty, but it's not rotted through anywhere, and there's no pinholes. Granted, there's a lot of all built up crap on the bottom from the gas leaking over the years, but I wasn't going to go scraping anything because nothing was weeping through, and I don't want to have to buy a new tank for this, at least at this point in time. So we're going to get this mounted up, and then we can drop the hood on the top of the tractor. Hood and grill are all back on the tractor. So I was going to pull the hydraulic pump out of this thing and clean out the transmission case, because when I drained it, there was a lot of junk that just kind of glopped out into the pan along with the oil. So what I ended up doing is pulling the side cover off over here where the PTO shifter is, right on the side right there, and then I could look inside with a flashlight, and it turns out it's not as bad as I thought. There is a little bit of crusty stuff in there, just little bits and pieces, but the majority of it's actually fairly clean for the outside state of this tractor. So I decided not to pull out the hydraulic pump. I'm just going to let everything kind of flush through. I did put some good used UTF in there that I got out of a road service. That way I can flush everything, and I have another bucket of good used UTF from a road service, and I'll flush it again with that before I actually put the proper oil in there. Same thing with the engine too. That's got used engine oil in it to flush out all that crap, and then I'll fill that with some good 10W30 and change the filter on that at a later date. So the last things that I have to do is just small stuff. I'm going to have to clean out the air cleaner, which I pulled the base off of it right here, and it's actually pretty darn good. It looks like somebody had filled it up with UTF, so it's really not all that bad. There is some crap in the bottom of it. So we have to get that cleaned out. I'm going to get the elbow back on there. I also have to put the new shift boot on so no more water gets into the transmission, and then hook up the tachometer cable and see if the original tach works. So here's a little trick that some of you guys might find handy if you're going through an old crusty tractor like this. I was going to use the original tachometer on this tractor. The faceplate is pretty much toast. You really can't read it anymore, but the hour meter is still there. And I thought, because of the character of this tractor being all rusty and everything, it would be nice to keep this tachometer in there versus putting the new one in that I had bought. So what I did is I put the cable onto the back of it and just put the cable into it. That way I could see if I could spin the thing over, whether it was going to work, and it was seized. So obviously enough, at one point it seized and the cable broke, and they took the cable off of it. So I took it out, I put some pliers on the little end piece right here, and I got it to move, even though it was really, really stiff. So obviously enough it was dry. So I put some oil on it, and it moved a little bit better, but it was still pretty darn stiff for having a cable on it. So what I did is, as you can see right there on the threads, is I took a very tiny drill and I drilled down through that aluminum casting piece, through the threads, and then into where the shaft is that attaches to this piece, where this shaft comes through this tachometer drive area. And then I drilled just a little bit more, so there's a little indent in the shaft, so it'll take the oil and cycle it around. And then I just kept dripping oil down inside of there, and now this thing loosened up and it's nice and free. And our tachometer, granted it's just my finger spinning it, our tachometer will now work, and I'm sure that the hour meter will now work too when I put it back in the tractor. So just thought that was kind of a little handy hint that you guys might be able to use. Well folks, we're all back together and ready to move. So the exception of the front left-hand tire, that will hold air for about 10 or 15 minutes before it goes flat. I have to either find another rim for it or fix that one, and right now it's looking like I'm going to end up fixing that one. I do have a new tube for it, and the tire should be just fine. So at some point in the near future, I'm going to pull that tire off the rim, fix the rim, and then that'll be all squared away. There's also a little bit of wiring work on the other side by the distributor that should be redone, and that'll come in due time. But for the time being, it's back together so I can get it out of the driveway. So I got the battery back into it, coolant's in there, nothing's leaking, tachometer cable's hooked up, air filter's all set. I greased everything that I could and got a new boot on the shifter. So now we're ready to fire this sucker up, take it for a drive. Well folks, that 51 Ford 8N is going to keep on kicking. Plenty of life left in her. Actually turned out to be a very nice running tractor despite the overall condition of it. There is a few things that I still have to address on it. As I had mentioned, some wiring around the distributor. There is a leak on the transmission too, and I also noticed that the axle seal on the left hand side here is leaking as well. You can see it's starting to weep past the hub, which is both a good and a bad thing. Bad because I'm going to have to pull that apart and get it fixed so that way the drum brakes don't get all mucked up with oil and everything. And it's also good because it'll help that hub come off of that axle, because there are spline tapers on there and usually they come off, but sometimes they can put up a bit of a fight. I also have to fix this front rim on the front. If I can't find one, I'm just going to end up doing a little bit of welding work on the inside. That way the tube that I bought for it doesn't get cut when I put that back in there, because the tire is still in good shape. We'll have to see what turns up for that. The hydraulic pump also doesn't work on this thing. I tried that the other day as well, and the 3-point's not going up and down. So unfortunately, that's either going to have to get addressed at some point, or more than likely I'm just going to end up building a drawbar for the back of this to hold those hitch arms up and just using it as a tug tractor for when I get a piece of property. And that'll be about it. It's really not going to get worked all that much. But I will be bringing it to the tractor show that I go to in the next couple of weeks, and I can tool around on it for the weekend. But aside from that, I'm pretty happy with it, folks. It turned out to be a very nice running tractor, and it's a good crusty old piece of iron. It's got a little bit of life left in it. So anyways folks, there you have it. That's the 1951 Ford 8N repair and startup.